All right, let's move over to the defensive side of the ball. The 2023 team wasn't up to the normal high standards at Boise State in recent years. They ranked 72 or 72nd in total yards allowed, giving up 385.1 yards per game, 18th in sacks with 2.57 per game, 40th in rushing defense, giving up 134.8 yards per game, and 110th in passing defense, giving up 250.4 yards per game. What did the Broncos do this offseason to try to improve that defense, and how did that unit look this spring?
Well, as you're looking at Boise State's defense, I would caution people to kind of look at the end of last season. Look at the last 4 games of the regular season in the Mountain West Championship and see what they did. When Spencer Danielson took over, this defense was just different. And I don't know what that says about Andy Avalos and what he was doing, but this defense just played different. They were more aggressive. They got after the quarterback. They forced turnovers. And, take out the bowl game against UCLA, those last 4 games were really, really good. So this year, the top 2 focuses have been creating more turnovers because they only created 19 last season and getting more sacks. They need someone to pair with Ahmed Hassanin on the other side to really, get after the quarterback. Hassanin is a really good athlete, a freak athlete, had 12 and a half sacks last season, but he can't be at his best when he's facing double teams every play. They got to have somebody else to come on there. So they're looking for that pass rusher. There's a good chance to transfer named Tavion Woodard from Ball State. He came in with I believe it was 20 career starts, 10 and a half sacks. I think he's gonna play a big role for them this season. And then turnover wise, they really kind of studied what other teams have done. So in the offseason, Boise State's defensive staff met with the staffs from Clemson and from Middle Tennessee State. Both of those programs had really good years the last couple of years in creating turnovers. And they just learned new ways to teach turnovers. They learned some new drills. They learned how to make it more intentional in practice. And they've done a great job. According to Eric Chinander, their defensive coordinator, they forced more than 20 turnovers just in these 15 or 14 practices in spring. So if they can carry that into the season, they'll be doing well.
You kind of touched on the defensive line there a little bit. Other than Woodard, did anyone else kind of stand out and kind of step up along that defensive line?
Yeah, there's a young D tackle who I don't know how many snaps he's going to see this year, but a young guy named Michael Madry, redshirt freshman. He wears number 99, which is a famous number at Boise State. Scott Matlock wore it. A lot of great players have worn that number. He's going to be really good. It may be not next season, but the following year because they have so much depth at the line there. I mean, you look at what they have back from last season. Sheldon Newton is back at nose tackle. Herbert Gums, Michael Callahan, Braxton Felly, all 3 of those guys saw a lot of playing time last year. So there's only so many snaps to go around. So I would say, Callahan, he's been out a little bit this spring, but Herbert Gums has really looked good. And he's a guy who's got a really interesting story as well. Herbert Gums right now is a 300-pound nose tackle. In high school, he was a 250-pound running back. This kid was just a freak athlete in high school. It's not often you see that transition. So he's still got that explosiveness. We talked to him last week, and he said he feels better than he has at any point in his career. So he's looked really good. But, yeah, I would say Madry, if he can get on the field some this year, he has a chance to pop because he's just explosive. He's long. He's strong. He can be disruptive in there.
You think Woodard's going to be the kind of guy lying up on the other side of Hassanin?
I think so. I think so. Woodard is more of a true defensive end, where Hassanin is kind of that hybrid DN outside linebacker
edge guy. Yeah.
Yeah. So I think Woodard wins that starting job easily. I mean, they brought in a transfer from Utah last year named Tyler Weggis that didn't really work out there. They got a young guy named Jaden Virgin Morris who's promising, but I'm not sure he's polished enough for that job. So I think Woodard is probably the favorite there. All the coaches have raved about him this spring, so I think he wins that job. But they just whoever it is, they got to find someone to pair with Ahmed Hassanin because everybody knows who Hassanin is now. Everyone is going to double team him. They're all going to run away from him. They're going to find ways to take him out of the game. So you got to have a second option.
Yeah, I think Woodard, I mean, to me, showed a lot of promise last year at Ball State. So he's very excited to kind of see what he can do there at Boise.
The linebacking group returns their second leading tackler in Andrew Simpson, but they do lose DJ Schramm to graduation. How did that linebacking group look this spring?
I would say linebacker is one of the deepest positions on this team. I mean, there are some young guys that are very talented that, we're keeping our fingers crossed and aren't going to hit the portal here in the next few days. But you mentioned Andrew Simpson. Let's start with him. I mean, he's going to win the middle linebacker job again. And that kid's people know Andrew Simpson now. you look at what he did just in the last half of last season while he was playing with a broken hand. He was just so disruptive. I think he finished the season third in the team in tackles. He's a natural pass rusher. He's really, really solid for them. That weak side backer position is going to be a bit of a competition this year. But my guess is that Marco Notriani wins that job. So they're having to replace one of their most experienced linebackers in DJ Schramm, who was a great story. He didn't crack the starting lineup until he was a fifth-year senior, and then he went on to put together 2 all-conference type seasons. So he had a great story. But Schramm was banged up a lot last year. I think he missed 4 or 5 games. Marco Notriani came in and played for him, and Notriani was the team's leading tackler through 5 games, I believe it was. I think he had 53 or 54 tackles before he got hurt. So he's a guy that has natural instincts. My guess is that he wins that job as the weak side backer. Now their backups are really talented as well. Jake Ripp is a redshirt freshman or redshirt sophomore, that the coaching staff loves. He's been really aggressive this spring. He's hitting guys. He's forcing turnovers. He's going to see some playing time. And then the other middle backer, Chase Martin, he was one of the team's best special teamers last year. He led the team, led special teams in tackles. He's a hard hitter. He's still pretty raw, but I can see him getting some playing time there. And they brought in a JUCO guy named Udoka Ezeani, and he's the fastest linebacker on the roster. A little undersized. I think he's only 215, 220. But, he's been disruptive in their first 2 scrimmages of the season, so I can see him getting some playing time there. So Simpson, Notriani are those top 2 guys, but there's so many options there at linebacker. You look, Deshaun Misa was a 4-star recruit, a couple of years ago, and he hasn't seen the field. Wyatt Milkovich was a guy that everyone was excited about. He hasn't seen the field. So there's tons of options at linebacker.
Moving over to the defensive backfield, and they were some of the top returning production last year in terms of tacklers. They returned leading tackler safety Alexander Tubner, third leading tackler Seyi Oladipo, and fourth leading tackler Rodney Robinson all returned. They do lose cornerback Jalen Clark to a transfer. How did that unit look this spring?
Really, really deep. So that safety and nickel room is super deep. You've essentially got 5 guys competing for 3 spots. But they're going to mix and match a lot of guys this year because, if you noticed last season, Boise State played a lot more dime, especially late in the season to slow some of these spread teams down. We're going to see a lot more of that dime look this season. So let's talk about some of those guys. Alexander Tubner is their leading tackler from last year, defensive MVP of the Mountain West Championship game. Really solid tackler, a little bit of an undersized guy. Sometimes he can be a bit of a liability in coverage, but I imagine he wins that field safety job again this year. Rodney Robinson is one of the most experienced guys on the roster. Another undersized kid, but he plays hard, plays with a chip on his shoulder. Also can be a liability in coverage at times, that we saw last season. But I would imagine, starting day, he's your starting boundary safety. Here's the rub. You have 2 young guys that are really pushing for playing time. So Ty Benefield is a guy that started games last season. I believe he started 4 or 5 games last year as a freshman. Long kid, he's 6'2", probably 215 pounds, good hitter, covers a lot of ground. He's going to see a lot of playing time again this year, whether it's safety, nickel. They're going to get him on the field. And then you look at the other safety spot. The backup is going to be Zion Washington, and I call him a backup, but this kid's going to get on the field as well. He's every bit of 6'3", probably 220. A physical kid, covers good ground as well. So I can see him getting some playing time. Shea Oladipo, the starting nickel, is one of my favorite players on this roster. You've never met a more talented but humble kid. His dad is a preacher. He lives that life. He's really open about his faith, but he's also a really talented football player. You look at his freshman year, in his first start, he had 2 interceptions. Like this kid just has ball skills for days. So I think he, is going to be a really special player again this year. He has that knack at nickel, because he's so physical tackling, that he's going to get a lot of playing time. He's going to see a lot of tackles. But they have another young man coming in at nickel this year, in Koanohi Kaniho, who was a corner in the last several years. He's transitioning to nickel this year. Another, really talented tackler, a guy that's really good man-to-man coverage. So I know I'm throwing a lot of names at you here, but we're going to see a lot of guys see time there. All 6 of those guys that I mentioned are going to see playing time somehow.
Oladipo, I think, is someone, especially has a good year, that we can be talking about for NFL draft as well from Boise.
Quite possibly. He's one of those guys in the NFL that's going to be a bit of a tweener. I don't know if he's explosive enough to be a corner. I don't know if he's quite big enough to be a true safety in the next level. But I mean, you never know. I mean, like I said, those ball skills are legit. He's a really, really good tackler.
Can you tell us how California transfer Jeremiah Irby looked in the spring, and what kind of role maybe we can expect for him in 2024?
Jeremiah Irby has absolutely stolen the show this spring. I mean, he's one of the top 2 cornerbacks on the roster. Absolutely. He's accounted for 6 interceptions this spring, 2 of which came in their second scrimmage. I mean, again, he's a guy with ball skills. He's a guy with good size. He's a physical player. So if everything stays as is, your starting corners next year are Amarion McCoy, who led the team with 3 interceptions last season, and Jeremiah Irby. Those are your top 2 guys. So I'd be shocked at this point if Irby doesn't start.
So we've talked about a lot of defensive names. It seems like there's a lot of names that are going to be in and out of this lineup. We got depth. You have to pick a defensive player to have a breakout type season in 2024. Who's your defensive breakout?
So this is another tough one. I mean, obviously, Hassanin had his breakout year last year. Irby is a very easy choice, but I'm not going to go the easy route here. I'm going to go a young man that I mentioned a little while ago, Jaden Virgin Morgan. A long athletic edge. He didn't have a sack last season, but he's one of those guys that was one step from having so many sacks. He was in the backfield all the time. He had 2 fumble recoveries last year. Both were deep in the backfield. So he's got that natural ability to beat a blocker. He's got a really good first step. He's really, kind of figuring out the mental side of the game. I think this season, even if he has to share snaps with Woodard, I think he comes out and has 4 or 5 sacks and really helps that defensive front.
We haven't done this to this point, but this feels like the right time to talk about special teams. we haven't done that in the past episodes, but we just couldn't let this episode go by without doing it. So they return James Ferguson Reynolds, an Australian punter, who I believe led the FBS in punt average in 2023 at 49.73 yards per punt. Is he ready to boom him again in 2024?
Absolutely. JFR is, it's not often that you have a punter who's a fan favorite, but here in Boise, the people love JFR. He's got his own fan section at games. There's a guy that dresses up as a kangaroo and holds up a signed JFR for Heisman at every game. Like, people love him. He's a talented punter. The last 4 or 5 years, everyone in college football has gone to that Aussie punting style because of what it offers, right? It's easier to directional punt. It's easier to set up a fake, and we saw it. JFR pulled off a successful fake last year. He threw a pass to Andrew Simpson to convert it for a first down. I expect to see that a couple more times this season, but I'll say this. JFR, James Ferguson Reynolds, deserved to be on the Ray Guy Award ballot last year as a finalist. He deserved to win that dang thing, and he didn't win it. He's my favorite to win it this year.
And we can't forget about our other kicker. We've got Jonah Dalmas, who statistically has been one of the best field goal kickers the past couple of years. And I think maybe he just inked himself an NIL deal. I think maybe I saw him with a new vehicle. How was he this spring?
Awesome. You talk what a great story Jonah Dalmas is. After high school, he goes on a 2-year LDS mission. He walks on at Boise State, but he didn't just walk on like everyone else does. Jonah Dalmas emailed the coaching staff, and he got himself a 4-day tryout with the team when Brian Harsin was the coach, made the team, earned a scholarship that first year, and now, he has a chance to be not just the greatest kicker in Boise State history, but one of the greatest in NCAA history. So Dalmas already owns the Boise State career record in career field goals. I believe it's 89. I may be a little bit off on that number, but it's in the 80s. He only needs 4 field goals to set the Mountain West career record. He only needs like 17 or 18 to set the NCAA record, which is 97. It was set in 2022 by Ryan Dunn from NC State. So Dalmas this year has a chance to walk out of Boise State with the Boise State record, the Mountain West record, and the NCAA record. And he's a former walk-on. What a cool story that is. Great kid, really humble. He's really special.
It might be tough. They might be scoring too many touchdowns to get field goals.
It's true. But you look at the last 2 years, he's kicked more than 25 each of the last 2 years. So if he does that again, he's got those records.
I saw a pretty cool video. I think it was yesterday of him practicing onside kicks, and it was kind of like, is there anything he can't do?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, he's solid, man. The one thing, if we're going to talk about special teams, and I'm sorry if you were going to do this next, but we got to talk about the return game, which was non-existent last year. And that's been a bit of an epidemic in college football. The way things are now, there's so many fair catches and punts, there's so many fair catches and touchbacks and kickoffs. But Boise State's a program that was known for its special teams for so many years. You look at Avery Williams, who's a 2-time Mountain West Special Teams Player of the Year, now with the Atlanta Falcons. They've always had that dynamic kick returner, and they just haven't had the last couple of years. Some of the options this year for kick return, look at a guy like Caden Dudley, a former wide receiver, now is a running back, really shifty. It was probably their best returner last year before he got hurt. There's another walk-on named Troy Wilkie, who's an undersized kid, but really fast, really scrappy. I think he's going to see some time there. I mentioned Caples as a possible punt returner. How about this? And tell me how crazy this sounds to you guys. Ashton Genty has been back there returning punts this spring.
Wow. That definitely seems crazy.
Exactly. That's the response that you should have from that. Your Heisman Trophy contender should not be returning punts, but that's what Boise State does. The last couple of years, they had George Holani returning punts when he was their best running back. So it's a risk. It's a risk reward situation. Yeah, Genty's maybe the best player on the field. Maybe he can make a big play, but maybe he also tears that ACL. It's scary to see, but it could happen.
I mean, the last electric guy I really, really remember, other than maybe, you got Zachariah Branch over at USC right now, Reggie Bush. I mean, he did returning, punts and kicks, and those were always electric. Yeah. And I don't know, worked for them.
San Diego State had a running back a few years ago that went to the Seahawks.
Oh gosh, he never really panned out in the NFL.
He was a really dynamic punt returner too. I can't. I don't have enough functioning brain cells to remember that name. So, but another name to keep an eye on, especially this year, is Chase Penry. I mentioned him earlier. He returned a lot of punts when he was at Colorado. So they could have him out there doing some of that as well.
With spring practice kind of coming to a close.